Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. Today's going to be a little bit different. I've had this sort of on my mind for the last couple of weeks, and like the last time we had one of these streams on Saturdays, I wanted to do something a little bit different with regards to uh, discussions over art and whatnot. So let me turn my camera on for a little bit. Hello, everyone. I hope that everyone is doing well and having a good Saturday. So geopolitics will continue as regularly. In fact, I'm going to actually go back in time, and we're going to be reviewing next week this book called Fatal Future, Transnational Terrorism and the New Global Order. And that's one of these post 9/11 about discussions about terrorism. And I wanted to see how well it held up, because when I hear things like new global disorder in the wake of everything today in 2023 now, so this book's almost 20 years old. It came out in 2004. We'll review that next week. But I've been in a few chats as of late, and there's always been this discussion on sort of the right about the need for more art, more artistic discussion, more people spearheading an aesthetic vision. And sometimes there are people that will occasionally review movies. I've done that myself. I've reviewed a few on Substack. I have a few scripts that I need to record, and I've done a few watch parties with my patrons in the past. And we have a conversation about those visions and the messages and the themes and the takeaway. And one of the things that I think often gets hidden is other artistic forms. So we have painters, we have writers, we have everything else. But to express sort of one of the things that I'm really into, I'm a big fan of musical theater, to kind of the degree that it's like not even funny. I don't know. It's an American art form that I quite appreciate and that I quite like. And if you can tell by the title, Misery Loves Company, I want today to talk about Stephen Sondheim's 1970 production of Company. So I have my notes as usual, and we'll talk into it. But probably the first thing that you're all wondering is, why the hell is the Prudentialist wanting to talk about musical theater? So much of the discussion about art, literature, music, the stage often gets ignored. The stage used to be sort of the epicenter where all things used to come about, whether it would be Shakespearean plays or grand Germanic epics that are still being held with orchestral accommodations and accompaniments and accoutrements, and that stuff is all but gone. Sort of the things that get made these days, we've kind of lost our interest in theater. I think mainly Hamilton kind of killed it, although there's some off-Broadway stuff that's interesting. I mean, for instance, I was talking about this on a Twitter space the other night with Mr. D, that they had done with Matt Smith a on-Broadway run. It was very short-lived. It was like 2012, 2013 of American Psycho, which is actually really good because Matt Smith does a pretty good job at singing, but it also offers a rather like Gnostic interpretation. And I don't mean that just to throw that word out, but it's more of a like the Abrahamic view of looking at things is way different, and that like this material world is evil and we've got to like just slash our way out of it and find this higher meaning and purpose. But we only have to accomplish this through bloody murder, right? Which makes that musical interesting. And some of the stuff you can find on YouTube, right, where they do the like Hey Paul scene and they like start striking with an axe. Like the stage curtains will fall, but it looks like, transparent sort of raincoat stuff, so you can see the blood splatters. It's very entertaining, very good stage work and choreography. But that's not what I'm going to talk about today. Maybe one day I will. But I wanted to talk about Stephen Sondheim's Company. So if you're not familiar with it, shame on you. It's probably one of Sondheim's best, although Assassins is pretty good too, because that's a dark comedy about all of the people that have tried to kill presidents of the United States, which is equally good. But it's a story about marriage, and it's a story about relationships, but also like being a bachelor. And so this is set in 1970, and it is about, of course, our titular character is Robert, or Bobby, as a lot of his crazy married friends will call them. And he's approaching his 35th birthday, and that's sort of the set piece of it all, is that he's 35 and that he's, unmarried, and he is surrounded by married friends. And the musical very much iterates that everyone is kind of reliant on him, the married couples. So it's this funny but rather heartening look at what it means both to be single, but also a modern conceptualization of marriage, which is really interesting because it plays both on both hands. And the reason why I wanted to discuss it is I was thinking to myself, man, this is not a musical that you can remake easily. It's not something that you could try and redo. Now, I know that there's a recent one where Elaine Stritch's character, Joanne, is played by like Patti LuPone. and they do it from the view of a woman, and like the woman's turning 35, and I just can't help but laugh at myself thinking like it's too late for you, but you know, it's never too late for anybody. But in that instance, yeah, it's kind of done. But I can't help but think to myself, in a story about the relationships between married people and their single friends, or even the own inner workings of marriage. For instance, the older married couples have issues with alcoholism, and they oftentimes will fight out their differences. A little different, you know, they'll just come at each other. But other times, you know, it's the aspects of cold feet, commitment in relationships. Amy's most famous bit about not getting married today, which if you haven't listened to, you should. That's hopefully my main takeaway, is that you should listen to these things. But it talks about in 1970s 35-year-old man in New York City, which in context, the average age of getting married in the 1970s is vastly different. So, for instance, the average age of the early 1970s for a man getting married was 23. The average age was 21. And by the end of 2017, the last available data that I pulled up was that it was almost 30 for men and 27.5 years for women. So things have been skyrocketing upward, and there's a lot of reason for that others have very much well documented, that marriage is definitely on the hoops. So in a way, that if you wanted to remake it, a 35-year-old bachelor is not all that different from today. Although I think that maybe if we were to, you know, if they were to remake it, right, or redo it with modern lyrics or modern interpretation, they might just be like, well, maybe he's gay, and they'll leave it at that. But, you know, the average age for men and women getting married in 1970, about 42% was under 20, 20 to 24 made up 46%, and 30 to 34 made up the smallest percentage of around 1%. And so it's a very interesting juxtaposition. But at a man at 35 being unmarried, it's a little different. But definitely, unlike the rest of his peers, he is much older and single. And there's a part later on, as the second act kicks off, there's a bit sort of talking about their relationship. And one of the married men says, you know, well, you know, every time I look at him, I see the Seagram's building, which is a famous building in New York, had reflective glass. So you never actually got to see the internal bits of the character. So I find this all to be interesting. And the reason to get into the main reason why I wanted to talk about is because today's day and age, I don't know how many people have that strong collection of married friends. I think in a city it's different, but most of our culture and most of our viewpoints of the world has drastically changed in the 23 years that this musical has come out. And that's primarily because, one, we've only intensified our desires to not be married in sort of secular culture. I can't help but think that the age of the Sex of the City, Sheryl Sandberg, and that lean-in sort of feminist culture, like shed your femininity, be like a man to the rest of us, and you too can exceed in the corporate world. And in turn, that has only sort of encroached upon male space and male identity, which is why I think one of the best takeaways, for instance, of, you know, Bronze Age Pervert's book, whether you agree with him or not, his sort of best call out is that a lot of the instances of male space, the male nature, the sort of human compulsion to explore, to conquer, to colonize, to do these things for great creative work, has been effectively whittled away over time. And in fact, if you are a patron of mine, whether as a YouTube member, Substack, or Subscribestar supporter, we just had a conversation on Oswald Spengler's Man in Technics, and that kind of plays into this rather well, because a lot of man's technological pursuits, especially in sort of this like Anglophone tradition of trying to liberate ourselves. In fact, you know, Spengler wrote this in 1932, and he's talking about, you know, oh, there were people like, you know, Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill or Spencer and such that were all writing about the need to liberate ourselves from the perils of wage slavery. And we haven't really changed much since those people, which is kind of damning in regards to sort of that tradition. But that's sort of being put out throughout the rest of the world. It's why transhumanism, as Spengler would probably have put it, that it's the ultimate rebellion against nature. And it's a futile battle. Like, we're not going to win that one, but we're going to fight it to the bitter end, which is terrifying, because that may mean the end of like technological society as we know it, or some kind of collapse. But to get back to here, you know, we have social techniques and we have these options to explore. And, you know, the musical, of course, is a comedy. It's very tongue-in-cheek in a lot of regards to marriage. And this stream will probably age very old, or you know, very poorly if I ever get married. And there are these interesting discussions with regards to, you know, all these married men recommending women to Robert. You know, Mainly they're all focused on their sort of sexual escapism, their frustration. So you already get the sort of boomer truth of marriage bad, or dead bedroom syndrome, or bed death, and things like that. Not just exclusive to lesbians, apparently. And there's no reference really to religiosity at all. This is a very secular story. It's one in which, while comedic, and it highlights that there are still some of these semblances of traditional order society, relying on your friends to help take care of kids, 7 times a Godfather, as it goes in side by side. And I can't help but think to myself that this is something worth discussing, because our discourse around marriage and relationships today is still very much found in this musical in 1970, but it's still also at the same time vastly changed. And so I want to start sort of doing these comparison and contrasting bits here. So, like, for instance, if you wanted to remake it today with a 35-year-old man, maybe you're gay, and they'd have a whole little bit about that. Or, maybe Robert blows out his candles and his friends all DM him saying, happy birthday, or, HBD or whatever, via text messages. That, or, there'd be a song where, like, some woman at the bar just calls him an incel, and then maybe that ends. My mind has gone wild in some regards to how this could be reinterpreted for today's modern audience, but a lot of it is still incredibly timeless. Most famously, the finale is Being Alive. The 2 best performances of that, if you're interested, are by the original singer and performer Dean Jones, who's rather famous for being in a lot of Disney live action movies in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. I think he was in like the Herbie movies back then as well. So he's a rather well-known actor. And he only died, I think, in 2015. So he's been around for a while. Sondheim only died, I think, shortly after his 90th birthday in 2021. But the thing that I found so interesting, the best part about this is that he's advocating for the same kind of bits that most humans want in relationships, which is the desire to be wanted, to be held, to engage in the kind of hell that he sees day in and day out on his sort of life that he sort of gets to reflect on, which is always interesting, because it's not something that you can fully experience when you're alone. And the sort of simulation, or the simulacra, of being surrounded by married people and getting their different perspectives is a great way to help it, but it's not individuated to your own experience. And it's a deep emotional kind of confessional about wanting to finally be held, wanting to have someone there with you, to be alive, to live. Which is this really inner reflection compared to earlier in the musical, where he's just going along with his friends, being in that position, not talking about what he really wants. Whereas, he's happy to be there and give advice and to go out for dinner. Because as he says, 1's misery, 2's, kind of dreadful, but 3's company, and that's where it's safe. And that kind of gets repeated throughout the sort of reprise of each different musical act. It's just all of his married friends trying to call him or leave voicemail messages and things like that, which today would be the same thing, where people will check in on you and things like that, which is I guess the interesting counter to that is sometimes when people get vulnerable on social media, which always is dangerous, you have to walk a very fine line. There are times where, one of the big reasons why I've decided to show my face and things like that was that there's a need to humanize ourselves. I always find it weird, and I've said this time and time again, it's always weird when Twitter accounts or people that you like on Twitter get banned or suspended, or they deactivate, and we always talk about them like they're dead. It's like, oh, well, we hope he's in a better place, or we hope that he's respawned, and that's that, and that hopefully all will be well with that specific individual, and nothing more, nothing less. And so not recognizing that there is humanity behind that. And of course, our political opponents, specifically like Antifa and such, our friend Charlemagne put out a very good essay with the Old Glory Club talking about Ryan Turnipseed, who's very real and is a human being. I've met him. He's like 6'2", very nice guy. And, what is the purpose of his critiques with the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod is that, well, if we can, make him anonymous and that he doesn't exist, it's easier to dehumanize him. And some people go along with this willingly because it's part of the act. Especially if you're in a crowd in a major city, there's not a lot of room for Sonder. The realization that other people are having lives as complex as yours, where it's sort of this unfathomable feeling that you are just one human being with your own complex story, your own drama, your own battles, your own demons. And yet at the end of the day, there's a lot of other people just like you. And sometimes that can be overwhelming, but then sometimes I think about the number of people that don't have an internal monologue in their head or don't have the ability to rotate an apple in their head. And sometimes that Sonder kind of withers away. But on Twitter, especially, I feel like, I get to see 1,000 different sort of Robert or Bobby like characters on Twitter daily, where it's complaints about the parasociality, the complaints about being there for people, but no one's ever really there for you. And that vulnerability is good to see expressed, but oftentimes it can be weaponized against you. It's not, life isn't a musical. Life isn't going to be some, soap opera drama or a Hallmark movie where everything is nicely wrapped up in 90 minutes or less, minus commercial breaks. And so, that's why you get your 2-hour, 90 block for TV. And I find it to be sort of dangerous, but at the same time, I think that there needs to be some honesty, because when we look at what today's movies or today's pop culture, there's that subset of people that are like, this is the literally me generation, which I think sometimes I fall into that. And then other times there are people looking for something more or wanting to appreciate the artistic bits about it. And I think that Company is one of those kind of musicals that holds up rather well for today's day and age, because you probably do have married friends in your life, and you probably have married friends that ask you for advice, and the same thing vice versa. Lord knows I do. And, I can't help but think to myself, I kind of experienced this sort of deal. Not saying that Robert's literally me. I'm not 35. Not yet. Hope to live to see that long. Fingers crossed. Knock on wood. But it's something that I see in my real life, where we have people in my church that are very much married. They're married young, or they're about my age and they're married with children. A good friend of mine just had their third kid, and he's also 27. And it's sort of this stark contrast of decisions of, well, like, what did I pursue in life, and what did they pursue in life? I mean, they met in college and all that sort of stuff. But it also comes with being geographically in the same location. I've always moved around. And so we're getting some weird introspection here. I'll try and pull that back. But I think that the musical itself holds up rather well in regards to today's day and age, although the company that we share has been substituted, not so much for physical company or people that would reliably ring us up. I mean, if you live in a city or you live in an apartment complex, maybe that's different, right? And you have roommates or you have neighbors down the hall that you are in good relationships with and whatnot. But that sort of Robert-esque style loneliness, I think, echoes very well in a digital age, because parasociality is by no means a substitute for anything, and it certainly does not liberate you from the real world aspects of relationships, or even just maintaining friendships and relationships with your cohorts or colleagues. In fact, I'd argue it's worse, and that it can lead down the line of some very ridiculous paths. Lord knows that access to the internet and wanting it to be your muse or wanting it to be your relationship can never ever be good. How many online personalities and, say, normie social media, or just media reviews, or television commentary, or just your average lol cow that gets turned into an object of lamentation and lampooning. It's kind of depressing, but for a lot of lonely people that tends to be the case. And even if you manage to escape all that as an online personality and you manage to get married, you've got to keep it either, it's a bit of your side life that you don't want to have intruding on your personal life, which I think is a very good thing. And then there are others that incorporate it fully, and that they're in it together, and that there are sort of no holds bar. And so it's good to see that in both places. For instance, yesterday, regardless of whether you think of his politics or his positions on things, Anglo Ortho had sort of almost like an NPR tiny desk concert in his living room with his wife. They were both playing Irish folk songs, and he was playing his guitar and his wife was playing on her violin. And it was very nice to see that. It was sort of a nice welcomed break from everything else. But at the end of the day, right, it's still just on the screen. It's not something that you get to experience. It's not anything that you're participating in. You are very much like a live stream participant, a concert goer, would you? And in turn, it's the same thing with watching everyone else's marriages or watching everyone else's piece of advice. And of course, as I've mentioned, this is probably one of my favorite Stephen Sondheim musicals, and I like it for a variety of reasons, because it pits sort of the stake of bachelorhood as nothing more than a utility for other people. So throughout the musical, you're going to hear all of the other married couples bounce off all their problems. The Amy's little bit where she says she's not getting married. She's going to get married to this guy named Paul. They've been living together for forever, and they finally decided, oh, we're just going to tie the knot and get this over with. And she has this like panic attack where she's like confessing to the congregation, you all need to go. I'm not getting married today. And there's this fun reference to a cartoon about Uncle Tom's Cabin about Eliza on the ice, which that shit wouldn't fly today. But in the turn of trying to comfort her and like get her to like come to her senses, like, you've been with this man forever, Robert inadvertently like inserts himself to propose, which is sort of that weird sort of like confessional but kind of predatory behavior, wherein, like, why don't you marry me? That's the song "Marry Me a Little," and where like that snaps her out of her cold feet and like leaves the church running after him. And I've experienced that once before, not me proposing to somebody like that, but I've definitely had someone with cold feet message me, and call me up, a good friend of mine. And it's just like, well, am I making the right decision? Like, is that the case? And to me, I think that kind of idea, I mean, the woman bit is always like, especially in the era of women's lib, it's always like, well, it's a prehistoric ritual, or it's this like ownership thing where women are property, or it's a bit of like a dowry or securing relationships with a rival country. And that we have this sort of, secular view of marriage. And I mean, today's comedians will reflect that most often, where it's like, oh, it's just for tax purposes or for benefits. And it's always irritating that we, especially in the West, and especially in the United States, kind of goes back to that Spangler bit about liberation, that, well, we can always pursue other things. It's just something on paper. It's a means of utility and nothing more, nothing less. And that's always frustrating because it's much more than that. I think that regardless of one's religion or tradition, that it's never been about explicitly property or anything like that. But, or even more so, it's not even about utility. Like, there are things that you actually have to do to make a relationship work. And, that tends to be the case. And sometimes you find yourself looking for loneliness and struggling to make sense of things, that you'll pursue a series of behavior and lines where sometimes, in this pursuit of substituting your loneliness, you'll take courses of action that are not good for you. And so in the musical, right, Robert sleeps with this sort of like dimwit woman named April, who's an airline attendant. And, there's sort of the aftermath of it, where she's like getting ready to put on her stewardess stuff and leave back to the airport. It's she's got to go to Barcelona, right? And he's begging her to stay. He's like, don't go. I'm not angry at you. Like, why don't we stay? I think that you're a very special girl. And then she's like, okay, I'll stay. And then all of a sudden, Dean Jones's voice changes. And he's like, oh God, what am I doing? Sort of, dare I say, post-nut clarity. And those kind of things still happen today, although nowadays it's more with regards to, I guess, dating culture, where it's, what's the word that people like to say, that they're a serial monogamist, that they like to constantly date one person at a time and go over and over again. Or nowadays, it's, there's this guy named Gary on Twitter who had the perfect example of this. He's like, these polyamory or polycule people, it really is just one narcissistic blob woman in the center of it all. And he calls it a non-binary star system, which I think is perfect, very funny, and I think I might use that in the future. But all these substitutions for loneliness are reduced to the utility of sexual gratification, or for not wanting to be alone but also wanting to be held or to be touched or to get your own specific jollies off. And it's never about what you actually want, or the fear of not wanting to be being vulnerable and then being eviscerated by somebody. And I think social media is the worst aspect of this. Like, I can imagine a Robert of 2023 scrolling through dating apps, or having his married friends review his matches on Hinge or something. And, like, she's too fat, too liberal, too progressive, too conservative, too right-wing, too dumb, too tall, too old, things that are reflected in the musical, of course. And I just can't help but think that musical itself is just very applicable to today's modern age, and that I wanted to sort of just talk about it a little bit, as I have been for like the last 25 minutes or so, because we today, more than any time I think on earth, we are watching our systems of human relations fall apart for these weird liberating substitutions. And it's not just that I can seek happiness with other people, or I can be happy that I've got friends that are married and that they're willing to have me along or to still be a friend to them. And it does show the inverse of the other side, that married life for these people in the musical are still kind of hold up to what married life is like for some people I know outside of my like religious friends, because there is sort of that like, well, we make it work. And it serves more as a utility. It's nice to have two incomes in the house, and they've got maybe one kid or no kid. Or most recently, we've seen a trend of what people call fur children. I have seen more bumper stickers that say baby on board, but it shows like a dog, and it it crushes me. I'm like, oh my god, this is where we're at. This it's John 11:35, Jesus wept, and that's where we're at. But I mean, that's the state, is at least the people in company have children, whereas nowadays they have dog children or fluff children. And there was this like meme about sort of millennial or even Zoomer couples where it was just like, one was like, the woman was called like the quirky Chungus woman, and she's like afraid of already like, afraid of being her mother, is already turned into her mother, cat a substitution for like maternal instincts. And then like the husband is like man child, and it's got like some popular pop culture brand, and it's just like has no personality outside of consumption, is somehow okay with this. The universe tolerates his virtual non-existence, and they're just together there. And I think we all know somebody like this. I certainly do. However, some of them do make it work. Some of the ugliest people I know have the most beautiful children and engage in mutual nerdy hobbies. So, who knows? There's hope for everybody. And that, I think, comes out in the musical as much as it does in today in 2023, where we've got people who will use their vices as substitutes to, just stick it out in a relationship. That's the musical bit in sort of one of the opening numbers, which is the little things you do together, where one's a recovering alcoholic. Another one is this like foodie. I think she's dieting, if I remember correctly, but like, they're, and one of course, the older couple, Joanne, played by Elaine Stritch in the original, she talks about the things that you do to make a marriage work. And she's like, well, I've done it 3 or 4 times. And nowadays, I don't know how often people get remarried, but I know certainly a lot of people just don't get married at all. And they're just more and more happy to be in their relations with other people. But yeah, so I'll take a quick break in regards to my commentary on this, because I have a lot more in my notes. I have like 2 or 3 pages. So, but I wanted to check the chat, because I've had a bad tendency of not catching up with you guys. But yeah, we're gonna have a fun conversation on this. Yeah, so let's see here. Yeah, no, I'm very Sean. I've read The Rational Male, and I think that he's right in a lot of instances. And this came part in regards to the god awful discourse yesterday on Twitter, where we had everyone decided to have a conversation. And Lord forgive me for bringing it up again, because I think it's just a series of spectacles that can sometimes tank a whole movement. I mean, it's excellent bait. AA does the same thing, and both BAP and AA have content and podcasts and things where this allows the cycle to generate in a very Vince McMahon, kayfabe style for things. But the Rollo Tomasi's right. So there are people that are lonely, and it's and the whole discourse yesterday was about oral sex, and regardless of whatever your position is on it, these things, it's the haves and the have-nots. And I think that Twitter exemplifies it, because, I lambast the Robert character kind of gets lambasted because he seeks internal meaning or purpose in his life in regards to his married friends, his company, that everyone wants to, call him for advice or to live vicariously through him, because he's the only single man that they know in their life. Whereas today, the same thing happens with parasociality, whether it's the e-girl or the fantasy of the girl next door is now available on OnlyFans for only $8.99 a month, or that there are certain podcasters or women that do their own shows that people can simp over and participate in the conversation. But I mean, men and women also have unrealistic expectations of each other, but men are, I think, more quick to be realistic and lower with them. But yeah. Yes, no, and Dean Jones was a great actor. It was very good. But scrolling through here and seeing what else is going on. I would say that that's probably 80% of men don't have standards, let alone high. You should come here to the Middle East and see how it is. I haven't, well, I've not been to the Middle East, so who knows? But I would imagine that most men in the West have certainly lowered their standards. And in the US, it's even worse in this respect because the obesity rates in the country are so high that even women that are, or like what would traditionally be called average looking, right? I hate the mid discourse because most men go for that, or most men settle. I'm almost in the position to say, lower your expectations, be realistic. Unless you're like 6'2" Giga Chad that's like ripped. I mean, let's be realistic. Like I know my place in the world. You know, I have a kidney transplant and I'm 5'10". Like not doing so hot in the world scale. Like I know my place. But yeah, I don't think that it's worth being black-pilled over, but I think it's going to be a sign that we're dealing with a great social malaise. I don't think, has anyone written a musical about today's like marriage or social problems? Like, is there like, I don't want to use the word in a derogatory sense, but is there a Incel the musical? I would love to read that, and maybe we can compare and contrast in the future because I think more arts discussion needs to happen. But yeah, that tends to be the case. You know, let's see here. Matthew Berry says the fact marriage is as prominent in America in comparison to the rest of the world is really something. Well, Barry, I wish that you would, Matthew, I wish you would expand on that because I'd love to know what you mean. I mean, marriage is still, people still shack up, people still get married, or people still basically become common law marriage. I mean, Pete Quinones is almost 20 some odd years older than he's like 20 plus years older than me, and he just recently got married. And I mean, congrats. I don't think people should be alone in life. That's like the worst part of it. But I mean, that's just the nature of how things are these days, is that more and more people are choosing to be alone. And I found a rather troubling statistic for it. I think it was like the number of hours per week being spent alone, which was like, it was the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And I mean, what was even worse was that this was during COVID, but not as bad as, say, but that number's only gotten higher post-COVID. I mean, being locked down and alone has been a terrible number on this. But the Washington Post did one on November 23rd of 2022, and he said, and this was an opinion piece from Bryce Ward. You know, he works at ABMJ Consulting. He's an economist, which you're already going to get the worst take imaginable. But I'm just here for the numbers. And he says Americans are choosing to be alone, and here's why we should reverse that. And so he said, Americans 15 and older, and this comes from America's Time Use Survey. Americans 15 and older are spending a lot more time alone than they did in 2013. This trend started before the pandemic. So I'm going to go share my screen real quick and talk about this. But yeah, here it is. Perfect. So yeah, I mean, alone has gone up to, you know, almost 10 hours a week. It's around 9 hours a week. I mean, and I get it. There's 168 hours in a week. But I mean, I think that this trend has only gone up, and that people are slowly looking for ways to get out of it. And I think that we substitute our loneliness or try to use it as a salve, the digital. And I don't mean you guys. Let me make that very clear. I think that if you're watching me or the Distributist or AA, that you probably have your life relatively well put together. You're either in education, you have a job, you have marriage and kids. I know what my analytics look like on my channel. Most of you guys are like ages 24 to like 34. Although there's almost 10% of you that are over the age of 55. Hello, hello people that are my parents' age. Hello. But yeah, I find that these numbers to be even worse. So, COVID deepened this trend during the pandemic. Time with friends fell even further. In 2021, the average American only spent 2 hours and 45 minutes a week with close friends, a 58% decline relative to 2010, 2013. I think that we've grown increasingly distant from our relationships with other people. And I think that this trend is probably not going to be reversed, because when people are atomized, deracinated, and have this telescopic sympathy about what's going on in other parts of the world and not their immediate selves, then that leaves them incredibly vulnerable to things that they are not expecting. which when more people are online, that leaves them vulnerable. I said this actually when I was talking with Benjamin Boyce, that when we sort of also abdicate our responsibility to instill values, that's something that's by far something that's happened left and right. I mean, even Christians are just as much to be indicted in this. I think Turnip had one time posted something of like, what do you mean that like 45 minutes every Sunday doesn't constitute a clever response to the 10,000 plus hours of public school education in a child's life where they're bombarded with all sorts of nonsense? The same thing comes with the internet when we are lambasted about seeing parents just, hand the kid the phone or the iPad. I can't stand that more when I go to like the grocery store or something like that, where I see like kids and they've got like the phone or the tablet and the mom's just picking out groceries or the father's doing it. Something just, my instinct tells me that something is incredibly wrong. And Lord knows I can't be the only one who thinks that. But the company of 1970 and the company of 2023 has only gotten unmistakably worse. We live in a much lower trust society than we did in 1970. I mean, it was only 5 years after what came in 1965, this great decade of change, the 1960s. And the 1970s writ large as a musical genre, not just on stage, but also, the rock scene, all these sort of post-1960s bands are all trying to make sense of what came out of the Summer of Love, what came out of 1968, 1969. Because I really do think that 1970s, in regards to music, is sort of trying to react to the revolution. It's all trying to react to what just happened the last decade. And it's not really good, because if you listen to any Steely Dan song, which I'm a big fan of, I love Steely Dan. I love all their albums. But there are some really brutal like depictions of just like decadence and decay, and that the 70s was just not a good place to be. I mean, you can get high off your ass on DMT or psychedelics or whatever. I mean, the same thing happened in the 60s, but 70s was not great. We have to remind ourselves that there was constant left-wing terrorism all the time. You not only had to deal with Nixon getting impeached, or not impeached, but he was forced his resignation. He was cooed out of office. And then at the same time, you've got Gerald Ford being lampooned. And then finally, Jimmy Carter, the oil crisis, Iran, all sorts of problems. It's not a good decade. And the music, I think, of the 70s really reflects that. And this, I think, company is sort of also a reflection of that in a time and an age of women's lib and an increasing urbanization of the human population, that we feel more alone than ever. And we kind of have to rely on the friends that we do have. It goes back to that old trend of chosen family, the family you choose, which really means no family at all, because it doesn't substitute for your mother or your father, right? And even then, right, parasociality only cranks that up to 11, where some people will look at the approval of their content creators or so on and so forth and look at them in sort of a figure like that. There is a growing gap and lack of mentorship, and most specifically patriarchal father figures. I'm glad that there are channels like Dad, How Do I, or, How to Dad, or it's like, do it yourself things to fix things around the house and things like that, because people weren't raised with that. Or worse, that becomes a substitute for fatherhood. And there is a dire need for mentorship. And anyone who's got a large platform on social media, and even a small one like myself, I get people that DM me asking me for advice. I can tell you a lot of what not to do, because I don't think people should make similar choices to what I've done. But I think that people are desperate for company, and people want to have that. But there is sort of an absence, I think, of their friendships and things such as that. But I have a dog. Yes, I do. But I don't call my dog a child. I don't say that this is my fur baby, Monothalmus. My dog is a dog. It's not an infant. It doesn't go around, and I don't carry it in a stroller like some people do, which is the most terrifying concept ever. No, I walk my dog around the land, and we, watch as we see rabbits and things go out and about. It's not the same. Not the same. But yeah, no, not that bad. Not that bad at all. But sometimes it's good not to be entirely. It's a Friday. I know that you're overseas, king of games, so enjoy it. Did someone invite me to go on a crusade? Let's go. But let's not also. Oh yeah, there was that movie called Cuck, George Sagan, and it is like, it's almost parody where they think some guy just gets like radicalized. Maybe it's realistic. Who knows? I watched a synopsis of it, and I think it was Devin Stack that Blackpilled had covered it a while ago, but maybe I should watch that and review it. I've been reviewing things with Geo on the Digital Archipelago, so maybe we should review Cuck. But Raisin, congratulations. I'm very happy for you. So go be with your lady. Don't watch me. Matthew Barry. Oh, thank you for answering. He says marriage is fairly uncommon, especially in Europe and Ireland. Ireland, I've said it before, but the average age of first marriage in Ireland is 36 and 36 for women, 37 for men. Oh my gosh. Well, then again, that's a historical trend in Ireland dating back to the 1860s. Really? It's always been that way? Even in very Catholic Ireland? That's very interesting. But totally agree about 1970s music. You hate the Eagles, Sean. Oh, well, I don't know if I want to be friends with you anymore. I like the Eagles. But yeah, I mean, the other thing too about the 1970s, and this is something that Dave Cullen on his other channel, the Dave Cullen Show, that's still on YouTube. It's his media criticism and review channel. He's been covering these 1970s dystopia movies back to back to back, which again, you had all sorts of things. Like he had Soylent Green, Logan's Run, and one other one that I can't recall off the top of my head. And it was just, it was always something that kind of, I think, again, a reflection of like this utopian revolutionist idea of the 1960s. And then it's like, well, really what comes next is disaster and these terrible things that come with it. And sometimes I wonder if that's the case. But, in a rural environment, it contrasts very different from, one of the other bits in the musical where they're talking about, dating and things like that. Marta, a woman that Robert had previously dated, was about talking about the city, and the song goes about like another 100 people getting off of the train, another 100 people getting off of the bus, another 100 people getting off the plane. Some come for work, some come from pleasure, some stay, some don't. But, it's all about how frenetic and crazy that dating is. And a lot of that still hasn't changed, except now it's cranked up to 11 because of social media, about trying to make sure that, constantly swiping, and another 100 matches, another 100 swipes, another 100, attempts to dating and whatnot. And I think you can see this easily be documented when women do those, breakdowns of how many people they've like swiped on, 10,000 swipes left, like maybe 200 swipes right. And then how many of that led to dating, marriage, sex, and so on. And, it's still frenetic. And out in the rural environment, I mean, a lot of that has been fundamentally squashed by COVID. And so like, I moved in 2019 to where I'm at now, out in the middle of nowhere. And you have to like ask yourself, like, where do people go in post-COVID to like see other people out here in the countryside? Like you have to have a community or a social events to do so, or like a regular haunt. And hopefully your regular haunt, your third place, as sociologists would refer it to as, hopefully it didn't get like canceled or closed down due to COVID and small businesses just being irked by it. And you think that it's all the sort of things that tend to be the case. And, and then of course you might find your regular place. Like, if you want your, I guess, goth GF, I mean, maybe the blue-haired chick who runs the counter behind the Barnes and Noble or the Books A Million is the place for you. But just maybe my politics brain is just like, we're going to throw that shit out the window. But, that's just me. But sometimes the worst comes to the worst. Saw a 70-year-old woman caked in grotesque makeup pushing a pram the other day. Thought, geez, she's starting late. And it was a ambulance. This is where I feel like the Chud Jack is necessary, like the ashes of the West .jpg. It's bad. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean that's the other one too. Is Children of Men? Although that very subversive film. There's been a lot of good breakdowns on it, but yeah, I mean, what did people rely on in the world of the Children of Men? Is that celebrities, pets, the world was bemoaning with sadness that the world's youngest person, the last person to really ever be born, died tragically young, and everyone was like really sad. Those things all come to my mind. But yeah, I don't think I could watch one. I don't. Look, I watched 3 movies about loneliness. I even watched an anime with Gio. I think I can survive watching a movie called Cock. That's for sure. But that tends to be the case. But that tends to be the case as well, right? Is that the internet amplifies the worst bits of behavior. And so when you take a society that is fundamentally ill and wants to be comforted and wants to find meaning, that what constitutes meaning is going to shift away from your friends. I mean, even the 1990s television show Friends, for all of its subversive attitude, the most unrealistic thing about it is that these like 6 people somehow A, got along, and B, all managed to live in close proximity together, and with all their jobs and shit could afford where they lived in New York City. But it reflected friendship. It reflected the fact that people had a friend group. It reflected the fact that people had something going for them. And, and that's the worst part about it all, is that everyone has a fundamental sense that things are wrong. Everyone has a fundamental sense that maybe they are kind of like Robert, in that they do want to live and that they do want to be with somebody. And then at the same time, we're in a society that is forcing you to adapt or die. This is the part where I do agree with Red Hawk on, is that there's going to require some fundamental adaptation. The issue I find, however, is that unlike someone like a friend setting you up with somebody, like, again, there's a part in the musical where, the usual reprise of calling everybody, like, why don't you come on over for Thursday? I've got somebody from that you'll love to meet, a girl from the office and he's from Ohio. And nowadays that doesn't tend to be the case when, nowadays everything's done through computer-mediated communication, dating apps, services, matchmakers, etc. Where people random, or as Charlemagne likes to say, I'm going to start treating Twitter like a dating site. And I know people that have gotten married through Twitter and have met through Twitter, or have met through Lambda's Discord server, his Bible studies Discord. They met through basket weaving and they got married, which is great. So, I mean, clearly there are ways for us to adapt to it, but, that tends to be the case. I'm glad that some people are hiking, searching through Barnes and Noble for Goth GFO listening to this. Well, good luck, enjoy. But that tends to be the case. Oh, well, no, we didn't watch one about loneliness. I'm just saying that we watched one with Geos on the Digital Archipelago. We reviewed Serial Experiments Lane. But yeah, so all loneliness is about it. So to get back to my notes here, since chat has been very good today in its discussion, has been... Okay, there we go. Perfect. That 35 is not as dangerously bad as it used to be. And to say this earlier is that when they did do a woman version of it, this is all centered around his 35th birthday. And of course, Patti LuPone is playing, Elaine Stritch's character of Joanne, but which makes, of course, the Ladies Who Lunch song even better. But the woman is 35, and we think nothing about it nowadays. We don't think anything about 35-year-old men being alone. We don't think about anything about younger men being alone. And yes, absolutely, not everyone is meant to be single, or not everyone's meant to be married. Not everyone is meant to be in a relationship. There is a place and purpose for single people. I don't think that a lot of people have a good answer to that. But, 35 is the new 25, right? Just like 50 is the new 40, or 40 is the new 30. We keep kicking the can down the road. We live in a biological denialism, I think, in a relation to that bit there. And even he's fundamentally aware of it, right? In the musical, even Sondheim kind of pokes fun at the fact that there are some people who are married with children, some people are just happily to not be alone, and Robert at 35 still wants company for himself, what he envies around those around him. And so finally, his wish in blowing out his candles was to want something. And so this sort of brings me to the other bit that I wanted to speak about, was that I find it interesting in the way that this is compared today. So a lot of people have discovered Company not through a collection of Stephen Sondheim, not the original recording, not the Pen and Broke documentary about it, which is a good documentary, but they find it primarily through a film that came out, what was it, 2021? Right? It was, I'm trying to remember, but it was Marriage Story. It was 2019. Oh, wow. Even older than I thought. I guess it got pushed back because COVID. But, it was nominated for a bunch of Academy Awards. I've watched it, and it's actually a really realistic view of divorce, at least from the legal side. And that movie is actually really good in regards to the depiction of marriage, because they get Laura Dern to play Scarlett Johansson's lawyer, and she is just I try not to swear as much on these, but man, she is a bitch, and she plays the role so well. Do you mean emoting the movie? Yes, I mean that one, but it's still very well done. I quite liked it. And it was this articulate expression. I mean, yes, it's very high class in regard, like they're musical television actor people from like New York and California. And like, it's not average, it's not a story that depicts divorce rather adequately in regards to those, like that kind of class of people, but the legal side of it's innately true. And it's, I mean, it's Laura Dern. George, you're going to keep making me laugh. Stop. But yeah, she is sort of a right old one. But, there's a part in it where in the midst of this like divorce proceedings, and like Alan Alda's in there, and he's just like the lawyer who's kind of all resigned. He's like washing his hands of it. And he's just like, well, this is just the way that the news goes. And like, how do you want to do this? And because he kind of knows how the sausage gets made. The law is fundamentally stacked against men in family court. And as someone who worked as a paralegal for years, so it inevitably killed my desire to be going into law and watching how people use their kids and their innermost secrets as weapons against their spouses. Yeah, I woke up one day just thinking, I don't think I want to go forward with law school, which sucks because I got a really good LSAT score, but neither here nor there. There's a part in it where, his character, Kylo Ren is married to the AI from Her. Yeah, right. But no, I enjoyed the movie, but there's a part in Marriage Story where Adam Driver's character is, same thing as Charlie, right? But he goes off with his musical trope. He runs a musical company. He runs a theater company in New York. But he's at a bar and he starts singing "Being Alive" from Stephen Sondheim's musical company in 1970. And that's how most people have discovered it nowadays. And I find it to be this odd twist that in 1970, the desire was to not be alone. The desire was to want or to express the need to have someone with you. And he's doing it in a very emotionally vulnerable moment. Adam Driver's not a singer by any stretch of the imagination, which actually makes that performance more real. But he sings it out, and sort of after a few drinks at a restaurant, and the piano player's playing it, and he does it. And there's like a singular clap afterwards, because it's kind of like, oh, it's kind of pathetic. It's kind of being vulnerable. And yeah, great man of many men are. Yeah. But the things that irked me about it was that I guess that really does illustrate, oh, it's a love story as the film tells you, but it's not the traditional sense. It's the story of divorce, where even I guess there's still residual feelings for one another. And again, right, like the stream could age terribly if I get married. But to me, working the inner parts of how family courts and family law works, whether it's just listening to depositions, interviewing people, it was, it's just, it kills people, but it's really, really, it makes one despair. But I found it interesting that in this moment of vulnerability, he doesn't want it to end. He still sees it, even though he's done clearly bad things in the film, such as it's revealed that he slept with somebody else. And that, the most famous scene, right, where they're both yelling and crying at each other and he punches a wall, which I think is very good acting. Yeah, you're going to get a full view of my taste, right? But I think that it seems to be for most people that it's gone from a desire to want somebody than the desire to realize that, well, sometimes things don't work out, but it costs you everything. I think that's where this rather pessimistic view of relationships comes from in a lot of ways, is that we don't provide incentives for people to stay together, but all the more reason to leave. Whether that be no-fault divorce, the fear of missing out, the idea that you're somehow being property or being owned or being taken advantage of. And the same thing goes for men. I don't think there's the whole bit about, I think, boomer truth that definitely comes into this way here, where what's the word I'm looking for? Like, well, there's a bit of boomer truth where it's sort of like wife bad. And I think that was on full display yesterday on Twitter, which again, Twitter's both a great but awful place. Depends on who you follow, what you do. But yeah, the whole BAP oral conversation where some people had made themselves look out to be utter fools, and some people had given the most despondent and despairing views of relationships and marriage I had ever seen, often to prove BAP's point about certain groups of people. Wife is a good thing. Having a wife is a good thing, I think. It's a net positive in men's lives. Men and women are meant to be together. A man is meant to cleave from his mother and father in marriage with someone else and then become one flesh, to borrow from Genesis. But in this instance, that doesn't tend to be the case anymore. I think that there's an idealization that wife bad when you can sleep around. And again, I'm just as much a product of this. I'm 27. I'm not married. I have definitely done my fair share of doing those things. But you kind of, and again, like Robert, right? Like you have that oh God moment, right? Where it's like, well, stay around, like don't leave. We could get lunch or breakfast together. And then she's like, sure, I'll do it. And you're like, oh shit, what am I doing? That's pretty bad. But I mean, those are the things that there's a part of it that is also class to some extent as well. And again, this is me just expressing my own personal opinions and expressions of things. Like, I've got my parents as an example, and I thank God that they're still married and they've stuck it out. But at the same time, you're also in a position where, I some of the happiest people I've ever met learn to accept their status in life. Not that they aren't ambitious people, but they know what they do and what they are and what they're good at. And I think it also it also kind of comes down to, like, what are your first principles? What are your axiomatic presuppositions on relationships? What do you want to do in life? What these kind of goals and ambitions and things. And I think that we do kind of live in this sort of progressive worldview. I mean, we innately do. I mean, conservatives are still very much liberal in a lot of ways, where, well, the sky's the limit. Anyone can be anything. Anyone can do this. Anyone can transcend it. We're still very much sold on this idea of social mobility. And we are in a material sense. We still do have that. People can get good jobs, invest wisely, save up, and come from nothing, and then still show themselves to act the way that they were when they were poor or from the middle of nowhere. And I would go into that further, but actually this Wednesday, my Real Talk talks about this in a lot of ways. I do know that there are people that use dating apps to find friends, they go on, platonic relationships and friendships bonds. That actually does happen. And it's just garbage every time, I mean, how many people want to do that? Because I think that friendships between men and women will always have that underlying current of sexual tension, unless one of them is just clearly flat out ugly or not straight or anything. Then you have your own specific position. But yeah, I mean, those things can be pretty rough, and people do those things. And to me, it just demonstrates that some of the problems that we're going to face in the future. But I find that people have to make peace with their lot in life. And the left has the epitome of resentment. Everything is about, resenting their class, race, whatever they are, weaponized white guilt, especially for like these PMC children who are just like, well, I'm going to go get a college education, and because my dad works for the regime or whatever, I can rebel against it, and I can talk about like gender inequality, or like Rahm Emanuel's children, or like Michelle Obama, or like the Obama's children, which that has its own fun conspiracy theory truth to it, doing weed and drugs and things like that. And it's just like, well, it allows you to act out. But for a lot of people, and especially I've noticed this on the left, is that there is this meaning in absentia, where absent of who you actually are, we want you to be liberated from it. Again, it kind of goes to this materialist lens. You see this mainly from white progressives, wherein they have to transcend and be like a classical revolutionary, a classical Marxist lens of analysis. And it all has to be about material lenses of condition, because that's the only way that they can really get on board in this respect, and it becomes a problem, I think. No, I'm not talking about you, Chad, at all. I'm ranting now. But to bring it back to Company and then to expand it to our current political state, as I have been, the musical's a really good comedy. And there are parts that genuinely make me laugh, whether it's making fun of, Elaine Stritch's performance of the ladies who lunch is making fun of the type of people that would be glorified on Sex and the City. When she's talking about the ladies who lunch and, another $1,000, and they're buying hats, and does anyone actually wear those anymore, or going out and doing these things, because she's the older character, Joanne. And I've always found it interesting because that's the kind of personality that she's lampooning, right? Like, that's her song. It's Elaine Stritch's like seminal performance. And what is it related to nowadays? Well, you see that on, Sex and the City. You see that with HBO's Girls, although the material conditions are a little more low class. And all at the same time, that's what gets glorified and lifted up on a pedestal, is the ladies who can girl boss their way to lunch. And what a better example of what is lampooned all the time. We all turn into Joanne or Elaine Stritch's character when we look at all those TikTok videos about like the day in the life of someone who works at Twitter or Microsoft or Google or whatever. They show off their expensive 6-figure salary and the, frivolous life that they do for one another. And, on one hand, most of those people got fired. So there's a little bit of schadenfreude in there. But on the second hand, those are the ladies who lunch. And we elevated that style, which was once lampooned, is now the sort of modus operandi for a lot of women. And that tends to be the case. And I think that we're beginning to see a long-standing bit of regret. For younger people, I think you're with trans regret. And I think we're also going to be seeing that with what the distributist, who is he's an older millennial than I am. I think he's about like a decade older. Not to insult him, that just tends to be the case. He's an older man. Mid-30s, and he's thinking that there's going to be this really big sort of psychological crisis when women being sold on this like truth or this lie that, like I thought I had it more. And even Mary Harrington, who some of you guys might have issues with, I find her to be interesting. She has this point where we have fertility illiteracy, which is very true. And that tends to be the case where, I don't think they even use the word geriatric fertility anymore. They use some other sort of like soft language in order to hide the fact that, yes, there are some biological realities. And that's the nature of the thing. And I find that to be the case for a lot of people. And some people will be married, and some people will have to live with the consequences of their actions. And we have these social techniques alongside our social techniques are enhanced by our actual ones, our actual tools and technologies. So whether that's in regards to dating apps or morning after pill and things like that, which, even back then doctors were warning, don't. But so much for trusting the experts now and then, right? Exceptional age fertility. There you go. And so there are all these like, I call progressivism as a suicide contagion as service. You see this especially a lot with those who transition and those who pursue just, in some instances, I think that, weaponized morality only encourages, people who make bad choices. Yes, we should save people in some instances, but I guess I struggle sometimes in watching incentives for our own destruction. And that kind of goes back to the whole zombie apocalypse Nick Land thing. And so Company still illustrates the benefits of marriage. And it still illustrates that you need to have meaning behind it. And, he sort of lampoons the secular marriage, I think, in a lot of ways, Sondheim does, because there's a bit where all of the married men are recommending women to Robert. And they're all floozies. They're all whores. There's a bit where, I've got one bit where it's like, I got a chick for you. And she's into all this exotic stuff. And he's starting like the Kama Sutra or all these techniques. And then he's like, call me tomorrow if you're still alive, because I want all the details, because I only live vicariously through you, because apparently the bedroom is dead or whatever. And to me, it just demonstrates, I think, in a lot of ways where it's just like boomer truth comes to mind. about marriage, where it's like, oh, marriage bad, or wife bad, bedroom bad, all those sort of things, which, again, things that are becoming more public and more infantile in the way that we talk about these things, where we have to live vicariously through others. It gets made fun of in that regard very well. And I don't think we've managed to escape the boomer aspects of marriage. I think that there's still a lot of people that view things as a wife bad, or some things about like the Amy's of the world, saying that what is marriage but a prehistoric ritual, or like property transfer and ownership. And it's, I think, some factors that come into that. And when you deracinate yourself from any meaning, purpose, or truth, even any sort of set of first principles, they don't even have to be Christian, but, a set of first principles that what comes out of it is that it leaves you very vulnerable to ideas that are harmful to you. Well, if you, like, for instance, the duty to reproduce. I mean, there are, only small double-digit percentages of people in the West that think that your nation does have one, and that it's immigrants are good. Or more recently, the guy that the head of the Babylon Bee, who's decided to like really double down on his like fetishism for certain beliefs and interracial relationships and things like that. And it's like, well, even conservatism incorporated, or average, I guess, this goes back to the evangelical question, where that has a problem. And those are problems. Like, I remember having a conversation with somebody, and I won't say who, but I had sort of laid out these structural problems that come with marriage and relationships, and like the need to have a more pro-natalist attitude. And then he had said to me, no, those are all very good points. I just don't want that for me. And so you sort of have this narcissistic me, F you, I've got mine kind of attitude that emerges. And I think that that's innately dangerous. So to really wrap up this talk in full, I think that on the right, when we have these conversations about art and, aesthetics and whatnot, we can't ignore the stage. I think in the future, I might do reviews or write up my affinity or love for musical theater. Because I think that that's something that we've kind of surrendered to the gaze, and maybe we shouldn't have. But secondly, Company holds up as a really neat little comedy, but also a very interesting marker of the West, and especially like urban New York City style upper class views on marriage and relationships. It illustrates a boomer truth about that, oh, wife bad, bedroom bad. But at the same time, what makes relationships works are the things that you do together. And that no matter how helpful you are to your friends who are married or to other people, you do want someone there with you at the end of the day. And, even the men sometimes look at Robert with disbelief, and they're like, well, what do you want to get married for? That's sort of this repeating bit there. You should all be very happy I have not tried to break out in song. But that musical holds up rather well. It's rather timeless. It's one of the most, received like 14 Tony Awards when it came out. Dean Jones's performance is the best, par none, with the exception of Raul Esparza's in 2006, but the rest of the cast sucks. And all these things illustrate that kind of attitude of, what do you want to get married for? I'm going to live vicariously through my single friends who can still sleep around and do things. And that upper class single lady mentality, the girls who lunch, shouldn't be celebrated. But in turn, all those things have become celebrated. All those things have become part of our society and part of who we are. And Wandering the Ruins, that's actually really funny. I may steal that. Thank you. And so we now have like reduced ourselves to all of these like Robert characters. And to some extent, if you're not a married man and you're on the internet and you're sort of on the political right, everyone kind of is turned into a Robert, where we look to other people with their relationship advice, whether it's the PUAs, whether it's the manosphere, whether it's MGTOWs, whether it's incels, whether it's trads and religious couples that want you to see their examples. And, we're all looking for meaning. And at the same time, we're all living vicariously through people that sometimes aren't even married. And in that instance, what doesn't go away, despite an age of low trust society, people openly, celebrating the destruction of the nation in terms of its stock demographic. And all of that tells us that the deracination
and the atomization that comes with being sort of like the single guy, especially in New York City, is that it's you still want somebody. And even today, we still want somebody. Everyone wants to go out for it. Everyone still wants to be with somebody. And some people try and compensate with their own loneliness through communities, online, the arts, or so on. But there is still a gaping hole because man is inevitably created to be with somebody else. It's vicarious, but yeah, Matthew Barry. I mean, that's my big concern is that I want to make sure that, if I'm going to set an example, one, I think about James 3, I'm going to be judged extra if I'm going to take any kind of instructional or teaching role. But secondly, that I do want to make sure that as some sort of political movement or ideology, or even people that share similar like-minded political opinions, I would like our side to be the side that is put together. I don't want this side to be the side very similar to the left, where someone walks in through the door or looks at the scene and does that sort of like weird, like Max in from the Goofy movie, and they go like, "Damn, you live like this? You think like this?" Those are things that I definitely want to change, or at least to be in a better position. So yeah, those kind of things come to my mind. In an age now where I see people like Joel Berry of the Babylon Bees, sort of the head guy, sort of double down on his takes that, the left and those evil far right wingers, they are all on the issue of race. And it's like, well, it's always been, those things don't go away. It's an immutable characteristic. But by engaging in this sort of selective denialism where race isn't, but gender is real, is peak boomer truth stuff. That the same thing comes with marriages and whatnot. And yeah. No, but on the Decameron Film Festival last year, I tore that movie a new one because that movie is attempting to write a love letter to Hollywood, but it sucks. I get it. It's one of the literally me movies. I like Ryan Gosling. I actually like the soundtrack in that, but it's a very poor impression of the ages of Fred Astaire or Debbie Reynolds and things like that. You go watch Robin and the Seven Hoods and then go watch La La Land and tell me which one's a better movie. And I'm going to tell you it's the Rat Pack every time because the other movie just sucks. So I will wrap it up there in regards to this talk. I know that there were a few super chats. If you don't want to give Susan money, there is always, of course, the Entropy link. That is the pinned comment in the chat, because I know plenty of you don't want to give her money. I certainly don't blame you. There's also Buy Me a Coffee if you want to use that as well. So you have options, ladies and gents. You have options. But I know that there were a few that were sent via earlier today via Google's little super chat bit here. So I'm going to scroll up and look for those and also see what, yes, Milton Babbitt's most famous pupil. You're absolutely right. I'm glad I'm not the only one who knows these things, but sometimes I feel like the only straight one who does. When Mr. D tells you that you're the only heterosexual that knows these things, that's kind of worrisome in my personal opinion. But Ogata for $4.99 US, a reminder that some anime frog character is still waiting for her Frog of the Week segment, and it will never come, but I appreciate the super chat nonetheless. I've already watched more than enough anime courtesy of doing the Digital Archipelago or things that my friends from high school have recommended over the years. My best friend, who will probably be my best man at my wedding, or at least he'll be there. He's been a big anime guy for as long as I've known him, and he's always tried to get me into it. It's just not really been my thing. There are a few good ones like Area 88, or Lane wasn't half bad, or even the Studio Ghibli stuff. But the rest is like, it's not my culture. It's not my thing. So I doubt that you're gonna get any anime frog character ever reviewed on Frog of the Week. So end of discussion. But your super chat's appreciated nonetheless. I hate being that guy, but I've got standards, so gotcha. It's not happening. And then Monothamos, of course, just referencing here, some will win, some will lose, and some are born to sing. Not everyone is meant out for it. The thing is that we used to have institutions, and we used to have like a cultural acknowledgement that there were places that single people could go to or do. And those things are kind of gone. Some people do have it where it's the church. There are some proper criticisms of monastic culture. The way that the situation was in Rome during the time of the Reformation, the status of how monasteries were back then, that's the case. In a lot of places that follow the Benedictine rules or the rules that John Cassian laid out, blessed saint. But we had those things. And it was very funny because my patrons and we were just reviewing Man in Technics earlier today, and that's available on Subscribestar, channel memberships here on YouTube, and Substack behind the paywall. Is that we are born in a position where there's sort of, we have to fight against it. Others are sort of predestined to deal with their environment and their location. And I think the same thing kind of applies to yourself there. Like, if you make the willing choice that this is what you want to be, which is alone or whatever, then that's fine. But I hope that it's in a healthy manner. If not, then, it tends to be the case. Yeah, that's very true. We do know him for that reason. Philip Daniels showing up with some musical takes, which I greatly appreciate. So I'm going to go down and check the comment, or go through here and hang out with you. Gene Kelly, better than Fred Astaire, just facts. I guess I'd have to watch more Gene Kelly stuff to do that. Yeah, so I don't know if I agree with that take. I still love Fred Astaire. They had leg work and choreography like none other, but I guess I'll have to watch more Gene Kelly stuff. So there we go. I'm gonna have to go. I'm gonna go back to the things that were good, which makes me fall into that trap of nostalgia. Which is why I really hated La La Land, because it doesn't hold the camera. It doesn't hold a candlelight to what used to be. It doesn't hold the camera light. It doesn't hold the candlelight to Fred Astaire or Gene Kelly or Debbie Reynolds or even or Judy Garland or anyone who worked in that time frame in sort of like the TV or even stage musical production. Doesn't hold a candle to anything Irving Berlin ever wrote, although I hate Irving Berlin for other reasons. Those are things that come to my mind. But that tends to be the case. That tends to be a way that we're at. We're there. Yeah. Oh, that's another good movie. I mean, it's not like funny, haha, Coen Brothers style of act. Like, it's no Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? But yeah, Hail Caesar's a very great way of demonstrating that, all these communist writers are a real issue. And that's always been the place. War has always been the single place for men. Yeah, I'm not a pro give war a chance crowd, but I've talked about that before. Gene Kelly was particular. I have seen An American in Paris. I don't think I've seen Brigadoon though, but yeah, I liked in regards to An American in Paris. But yeah, do I hate him because he's German? No, I don't like the fact that the man responsible for some of the most popular quote unquote Christmas music of the 20th century wasn't a Christian and took Christ out of the picture. And so I dislike him for that. I dislike for the fact that some of the most popular American Christmas songs that you still hear on the radio to this day every December helped accelerate the taking Christ out of Christmas. That's why. There are some that are still very good that aren't written by him. Like, for instance, one of my favorite sort of Christmas songs growing up is God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen. That helps. But yeah. Oh no, George Sagan actually not black-pilled. I know he's done a video on it, but actually there is a magazine article from The Forward, which I think is like a very well-known magazine for a certain group of people, that says if you hate all these like Christmas songs, you can thank all of the guys that escaped the pogroms that started writing music. And he's like, oh, well, it's actually an American Christmas song. I was like, no, no. Those things definitely come to my mind. Oh, Silent Night. I even like We Three Kings is such a great one. It's a great one for Epiphany and such like that, Orientar. Things are great. But it's a conversation that I think Black Pill has covered very, very well. But yeah, it is scary once you realize it's almost every single modern Christmas song in existence. But all right. So, there were a few more from from Entropy, from Ben White. Okay, so the first one from Ben White. Ben White, for $3 US. He says, we've been told that gatekeeping is, especially in media and gaming communities. However, we've seen how the left pushed away their own beloved IPs like Lord of the Rings or Scooby-Doo. But he continues on with another super chat saying, for $3 US, thank you, Ben. But I've noticed how important gatekeeping is. The church is always gatekeeped in terms of bad actors and heretics. How do you balance gatekeeping and being welcoming to newcomers? Well, I guess that would depend on, I guess in terms of politics, Ben, or, I mean, you don't have to send a super chat, but I mean, I'll try and answer that in 3 lenses. So in reference to basket weaving, politics, and then hobbies and IPs that we enjoy. I'm going to do those 3 things. Politics is going to be always the hardest one because there's always going to be people that you disagree with that are somewhat on your side, and that you have to make sure that, I mean, the obvious way to tell, especially for bad actors, is like, how quickly are they to Fed post? How impulsive are they, interacting with these characters online or in a discussion or a live stream or a Discord server can sometimes be a very easy way to like delineate what kind of actor they are or what they do. Also, you can always judge a man by their works. You shall know him by his fruits. And so those things also immediately come to my mind is that, if you can tell that someone's a bad actor or that, age also plays a role, because I do know younger men in their early 20s that want to take action, that want to storm the Bastille tomorrow, or just read something by, Death of the West or Death of a Superpower by Pat Buchanan, and they realize how things are borked beyond all recognition. And so we got to go, storm the beaches. We got to go like take over Washington, D.C. now. And I do have some lamentations for people my age and younger, because it's like, well, all that stuff happened already. The revolution already came and went, but you have to act accordingly, because we are indeed characters and creatures of prey, not predators, at least if you're on the right. And so politically, I think that it always has to come and discern about how openly you talk about certain things, because there are stuff that will get you banned very quickly. How quickly are you to try and infiltrate, like things that would make you clearly look like someone's sort of brown nosing, kissing ass, and how quickly they want to get into the scene. Are they trying to buy their way in? Are they trying to get you to reveal information? I mean, those are quick ways to start gatekeeping. In regards to, let's say, well, that was politics. So let's say in regards to, religion or hobbies or things like that. I mean, that's in one regard. I'm kind of happy that in like the 3 years I've spent really like searching for Christianity and coming back and like finding the Orthodox Church, is that the catechesis is so ridiculously long. I've been told by others that it's a really good way to help get like the political, trad extremist type political actors to like simmer down, or they'll eventually leave because it's not right away. So that helps, but I think that also requires gatekeeping in the ends of having well-defined rules. Like, especially if you own, say you own a Discord server, right? Like, you're going to have mods. You're going to have things that are clearly set aside for what you need to do and things like that. And I mean, as for IPs, you're just going to have to call out bad actors. I mean, we've seen this all the time with various things like Dungeons and Dragons, right? It's almost like the perfect example, because there's this push, and they recently had from Wizards of the Coast, we have wheelchair accessible characters and campaigns. And it's like, in a world where spells and magic can instantly heal and regenerate wounds, organs, and bring people back from the dead, you opt to be the cripple. Okay, not what I would play as. I would probably create human Giga Chad like characters, great with the sword, but that's just me. But you do you. But you also have to be actually very vocal. I mean, Turnip has set a very good example to call out literal, BS in his own church community. I mean, the same thing happened with Wizards of the Coast and their general licensing agreement, or their game service license or whatever. They were going to change it and deviate from the the open gaming license that they used to have for years, that allowed Roll20.com to exist and people to set up their own campaigns and to sell their own campaigns as long as they abided by the very short licensing agreement. They wanted it to be monetized, and people went. Every nerd and their mother went to town on this thing, and Wizards of the Coast has kind of pulled back. The battle is not over by any stretch of the imagination, but even, non-political channels, like for instance, there's a guy by the name of Tim's Variety that I like to watch, because he does gaming content reviews of things and War Thunder and stuff like that. And he's just like, yeah, this is bad. And he's like, and he actually had to get very personal and say like, listen, this is my career. This is what I work in. This is where I've done public service before. And he's like, yeah, this is like a really shitty agreement. And so that kind of stuff is important for us to be just active and vocal about it. So, I mean, you kind of have to be welcoming to newcomers, I guess in the same way that you're going to have to interact with anybody. You have to slowly get to know them. You have to conduct some form of psychological triage and determine very quickly if they are worth their time and worth their effort. I mean, that also requires you to see what kind of work they put out or how they conduct themselves or how they behave themselves. Lord knows I'm not very good at that in some regards. I can still be very impulsive and shitposty. I know it's fun, but on one hand, I kind of have to often balance between this name/brand I've put out for myself as sort of this prudent individual, when at the same time, it's like, yeah, it's sometimes fun to type a certain letter in the alphabet and see what happens next. But you have to be careful of who your audience is. And at the same time, who watches or follows you on Twitter, which are a lot of big named people. And so that's always a balance. But as for newcomers, I've always said yes to people who want to interview me or want to like chat or have an idea and respond to DMs. I'm not as like instantaneously like, yes, okay, let's do it. I will always tell people, and there was a gentleman I actually have to get back to via Twitter DMs about this, who was on Jay Burden's show. He asked if we could speak. And I kind of have to watch his streams, and I have to like watch his content or peruse what he talks about, peruse his tweets, and be like, is this a guy I want to talk to or associate with? Is he worth bringing in? Not to say that I'm a gatekeeper in any way, stretch of the imagination. I'm not, I don't think. But, even as someone who creates content and analysis and commentary, I have to think about those things. So I guess in those ways, Ben, would be the way to do it, and balancing out my hobbies, religion, or my personal friends and relationships, or even my hobbies and IPs. Those are things that come into my mind. I really actually despise, though, the whole Harry Potter thing. For instance, this is an IP rant, but we're in the super chat, so I'm just going to go off on this tangent. But there was some, I don't think Harry Potter is like right-wing literature. But because like she's TERF, there are people that think like owning a set of Harry Potter is a way to own the chuds when she doesn't agree, or to own the libs, but she doesn't like you either, right? She's still got her own politics. She's just like a single issue person. It's on regards to the issue of the transgender question. And it's not like she's a big advocate for what you and I may believe or think in. And sometimes I find that stuff to be rather concerning. That always worries me. So I hope that answers your question, Ben. But in the same way that I actually, in the other aspect of gatekeeping, I actually don't like Tink Sword or Malcolm Keone or whatever his name is, where it's but personal observation. My problem is that one, the enemy of my enemy is not my friend. They'll happily come after my head as well if the opportunity arises. But two, we talk about the neocon cycle, or how yesterday's revolutionaries are today's conservatives, and that neoconservatives were just disaffected Trotskyists. That's not a right-wing critique. I mean, even liberals like Francis Fukuyama has done that. I talked about that in my video, The Ratchet's Paul, about how the ratchet turns leftward, and that all of a sudden, because the right doesn't have institutional power, and we're very much a part of that high-low versus middle game. How many of us are taking on Marxist thought or analysis? Sometimes I can speak with them, and I've done that before, whether it was on the Fed Post or their new podcast, These People Are Sick, that they are still got a one-track Marxist analysis lens, and they can identify spiritual issues, but to them it's just, we're all slaves to capital, when that's not 100. I mean, there's critiques of capital from the right as well. We're not, I've always said, do not turn the GDP into a golden calf, but I don't want to associate with that person. I think that we've got enough of that crap enough online and in some of our thinking that we don't need it. I mean, Lord knows we know where Marxism takes us, so let's not go down that route. But I just wanted to help people spell Nigel. There you go. No, it's not out yet. It will be out in the next few days. I will post it on the community tab. It was actually a good conversation. He got me in a few places, which is good because I think it's still good to have to talk to people that are of disagreement because it helps me sharpen my mind and sharpen my thinking. And he got me in one good place. And you'll see it when it comes out. But yeah, no, I mean, it'll be out in a few days is what he told me. So when it comes out, I'll let you know. But I was happy to have a conversation. And I wasn't 100% political. You got some of my main things that I talk about in regards to culture or the online. But we talked about my video. We talked about my political story and background, my religious background and things like that. So it was a good time. But at the end of the day, as Matthew Berry points out, you do actually have to spend time with people. And failure to do otherwise is going to hurt you, I think, in a lot of respects. But yeah, I mean, those things definitely come up. Oh, Tuesday. No, I mean, he's still around. I'm not going to bring your comment up on there, but no, he's still around. He still does his things, but he's also busy working on a farm and making himself, and his family, successful out where he lives on his farm. So yeah, I mean, that stuff matters. So yeah. Let me just double check. Okay, cool. It doesn't look like there's any more super chats coming in, so I can just chat with you guys for a little bit. Probably be on for another 5 minutes or so, and then I'll take care of it because I've got to get ready to go soon because church later in the afternoon. Yeah, that's one of my favorite things is the Charlie Brown Christmas special because, he just, Linus goes, "Lights, please," and then recites the Gospel of Luke and just talks about the nativity and the good tidings unto certain shepherds. So yeah, absolutely. That's probably one of my favorites. I get on social. Well, I think that you should probably have more than that, but that's just my 2 cents. So as we wrap up here, other people outside, yes, not just outsideness and not just the otherness of the online, no coldness be my God stuff, but yeah, you have a life to do and you got things to do, and that'll be a good thing. So those things are all the sort of stuff that matter in our politics and things like that. So with that, I'm going to conclude this discussion on marriage and things like that, as we always do on this channel, with a little bit of reading from scripture. So let me go find what I'm looking for. There we go. Let's see if I can find it. There we go. Okay, so we'll be reading from Ephesians 5 and 5:22 to 33. And then, we'll conclude it there. So here we go. All right. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord, and for the husband as the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. Therefore, just as the church is subject to Christ, so let the wives be their own husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her, that he might sanctify and cleanse her with washing of water by the word, that he might present her to her a glorious church, not having a spot or wrinkle on any such thing, but that she should be holy and without blemish. So husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one has ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as the Lord does the church. For we are members of his body, and of his flesh, and of his bones. For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. Nevertheless, let each one of you in your particular so love his own wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. So I'll leave it for there with you all, folks. Outside is an evil death orb where light lives. Well, sometimes you need the light, whether it is the uncreated light or just the natural sunlight. Get some vitamin D in you. But with that, ladies and gentlemen, I have a new video premiering on Wednesday, the 1st of February. And that is going to be the first real talk of the year. And it's going to be coming out 2:40 or 3:40 p.m. Eastern. So right before the Cigar Stream. It's just a short real talk on the issue of class and castes and rootless cosmopolitans. And if you enjoyed this, by all means, just let me know in the comments, because I do want to talk more about the arts. I think that there needs to be more conversation about art and theater and music on the right. There needs to have that there as well, alongside our politics. So let me all know in the comments, and I will see you all in the premiere chat this Wednesday. Take care and Godspeed. I'll see you later.